Madison Reed thought she was hosting just another dominating interview until she told Jasmine Crockett to go back to Africa on live TV. Jasmine's calm, devastating response didn't just silence the studio. It sparked a national reckoning that no one could ignore. The lights were a little too bright, the coffee a little too bitter, and the smiles just a little too wide. It was Thursday morning at the Daily Exchange, a popular talk show that billed itself as where real conversations happen. Though anyone who watched knew the real conversations often got clipped for the internet later. The host, Madison Reed, perched in her usual spot at the center of the crescent-shaped couch. She wore a powder blue blazer, white sneakers, and the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Madison had built her career on progressive branding, marching in rallies, quoting James Baldwin, starting every Black History Month with a curated book list. But behind the scenes, she had a different reputation. A knack for small comments that landed wrong. A way of joking about race or gender that always made you wonder if it was really a joke at all. Today, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was the featured guest. She was there to talk about voting rights, activism, and the future of civic engagement. Or at least that was the pitch. But from the moment Jasmine's name had appeared on the rundown, the producers felt the shift. Madison didn't dislike Jasmine exactly. She just didn't know what to do with someone who didn't need her approval. As Jasmine stepped onto the set, the cameras already rolling, she moved like she had all the time in the world. Tailored black blazer, soft gold necklace, natural coils pinned neatly back. She shook Madison's hand, gave the co-hosts a polite nod, and settled into the far end of the couch with a stillness that made even the fake plants look nervous. The intro music faded. Madison leaned forward, cue cards in hand, flashing that perfect smile. Joining us today is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in the world of political activism and, dare I say, one of the most spirited voices out there. Jasmine smiled politely. The first crack of tension barely audible, but it was there, threading itself into the room like a draft under a locked door. The cameras panned wide. The countdown in the control room blinked red. And somewhere in the gut of the studio, everyone could already feel it. Something was about to slip. The first questions were the usual fluff. Madison asked about voter turnout numbers, election security bills, the importance of civic engagement. It was the kind of scripted conversation that sounded important, but didn't scratch anything deeper than the surface. Jasmine answered each question with precision, measured, clear, never rushing, never hedging. She didn't drop sound bites. She dropped sentences that asked for your full attention. But Madison didn't like full attention unless it was on her. And within the first 5 minutes, the interruptions started. Well, but don't you think? Madison would cut in, smiling sweetly, brushing over Jasmine's points like they were minor footnotes. Whenever Jasmine cited a study or referenced a historical precedent, Madison tilted her head, eyebrows raised, like she was being challenged on her own set. Jasmine didn't react. Not to the interruptions, not to the tiny, clipped laughs Madison gave after almost every answer, like she was dismissing the seriousness of it without ever actually saying the words. When Madison interrupted her for the third time in 2 minutes, Jasmine paused mid-sentence, smiled gently, and said, "I'll let you finish." It was soft, polite, devastating. The room shifted. The crew stiffened behind the cameras. The co-hosts glanced at each other over the rims of their coffee cups. Madison regrouped quickly, switching to a new card, her smile a little tighter now. "Congresswoman, some people say activism is becoming too emotional these days, too divisive," Madison said, tapping her pen against her knee. "How do you respond to that criticism?" Jasmine didn't blink. "I'd say calling emotional engagement a flaw says more about who's uncomfortable than it does about the issues at hand." There was no bite in her voice, no anger, just truth, poured slow and heavy, like syrup over glass. Madison shifted in her seat. The tension wasn't boiling yet. Not yet. But it was building, molecule by molecule, and it was only a matter of time before someone cracked, and it wasn't going to be Jasmine. It happened fast, almost like Madison didn't even hear herself saying it. Or maybe she did. Maybe it slipped out from somewhere deeper, the part of her that had never been checked, just smiled at, nodded along with. They were talking about voting legislation now. The stakes were higher. Jasmine was connecting the dots between disenfranchisement, systemic barriers, and a long American history too many people preferred to gloss over. Her words were sharp but still controlled, never veering into anger, never giving them an excuse to dismiss her. And Madison hated it. The audience could feel her losing grip. The co-hosts shifted in their seats, sensing it too. "Well," Madison said with a tight little laugh, cutting Jasmine off mid-sentence, "maybe if you don't like how things work here, you should just go back to Africa." It dropped into the room like a hammer. The smile still flickered on Madison's face, as if she hadn't fully realized what she had just said, as if she thought it was clever, as if it was just another offhanded jab that would be swallowed by the laughter track. But there was no laughter. There was no polite chuckle to bail her out. The audience, hundreds of them packed into those bleachers under the fake stage lights, gasped so sharply that it sounded like the air got sucked out of the building. A woman in the third row actually covered her mouth with both hands. One of the camera operators froze, hand hovering near the zoom control. The co-host, sitting closest to Madison, blinked twice and shifted their chair half an inch away. Emotion so slight but so loud in the silence that followed. The cameras kept rolling. They caught everything. Madison's smirk faltering, confusion flickering across her polished exterior. The growing realization that this time, the room wasn't going to save her. Jasmine didn't say a word. Not yet. She just sat there, hands folded neatly in her lap, pen resting between her fingers like a gavel she hadn't yet decided to swing. The seconds stretched. The audience waited. The crew waited. And in that moment, between the violence of the insult and the violence of what Jasmine would not give them back, something inside the entire room shifted forever. It was a stillness that didn't feel human, like the air itself had pressed pause. The kind of silence that isn't just absence of sound, it's the presence of something heavy, thick enough to choke on. Madison sat frozen, realizing too late that there were no good exits from where she had just led herself. The audience, caught somewhere between horror and disbelief, barely moved. Phones were lifted slowly, almost instinctively. Some people stopped breathing entirely, as if making noise would make it worse. Even the co-hosts, the ones paid to roll with any mistake, were paralyzed. One of them leaned slightly forward, as if to speak, then thought better of it and sat back like a statue. Behind the cameras, the production crew exchanged wild, frantic glances. Someone mouthed "cut to break" to the control room. The director shook his head. "Keep rolling. Don't look away." And in the middle of all of it, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. No visible flinch. No wide eyes. No swallowed gasp. Her face was unreadable, but not blank. There was something alive behind her eyes. Something steady, cool, assessing. Not sadness. Not even anger. Something heavier. Something older. The kind of focus a tree must have when the wind rips at it, but the roots run too deep to break. She tilted her head slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if studying Madison. Not the way you study an opponent, but the way you study a crumbling foundation before deciding whether it's worth salvaging. The insult hung there. Ugly. Unfixable. Jasmine's fingers tapped once against the pen still resting on her knee. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. Tap, like the cocking of a weapon more powerful than anything Madison could have imagined. The camera light stayed red. Still live, still rolling, still capturing every single breathless second of a moment that was about to define much more than just a bad interview. It wasn't about a mistake anymore. It wasn't about a slur. It was about what happened next. And everyone watching knew, deep in their gut, that Jasmine Crockett was about to answer. But not the way anyone expected. Jasmine didn't move right away. She let the silence settle, let it stretch so long it became uncomfortable, then unbearable. Only then did she lift her eyes and meet Madison's. Not with rage, not with hurt, with something harder to dismiss. Absolute clarity. She shifted in her seat, slow and deliberate, and placed her pen down beside her. Then she spoke. Her voice was low, steady, like the slow rumble before a storm you can't outrun. "You know," Jasmine said, "I get why you said that." Madison blinked, mouth half open, as if she expected a slap that never came. Jasmine continued, "It's easy to forget that some of us weren't just brought here. We built here." No one moved. No one dared to. "My ancestors didn't come here looking for opportunity. They were dragged here in chains. They bled in fields they didn't own. They built roads and bridges and cities. They fought in wars they didn't start, for freedoms they didn't always get to touch." The audience was stone silent. And yet, Jasmine leaned forward slightly, just enough that her voice filled the room without rising. Despite all that, despite centuries of erasure and violence and being told to go back to a place we never left in spirit, my ancestors stayed. They endured. They survived. She looked directly into the camera now, not Madison, like she was speaking to every living room and break room and school library watching. "I am as American as the soil you walk on. I am the product of endurance, of faith so deep it planted itself in broken ground and grew anyway." She smiled then, small and controlled. "And if you're uncomfortable with me questioning how things work here, maybe that says more about the system than about me." She sat back, folding her hands neatly in her lap again. Calm, composed, unshakable, no shouting, no anger. Just the kind of truth that doesn't need a microphone to be loud. Madison sat frozen. The co-hosts looked down at their notes, pretending to read things they weren't seeing. The cameras captured every breathless beat. Because Jasmine Crockett hadn't just answered the insult. She had dismantled it, brick by brick, word by word, and left the world watching with no room left to look away. The audience didn't know what to do at first. For a moment, there was no reaction, just the heavy hum of realization settling over the room like smoke after a fire. Then, quietly at first, someone clapped. Not the forced, polite kind you hear on cue. This was something else, something involuntary, something real. The claps spread, tentatively, like people checking if it was safe to move again. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes with the edge of her sweater sleeve. A man near the back shifted forward in his seat, hands clasped like he was watching a sermon, not a talk show. Even a few of the production crew stood a little straighter behind the cameras, like they understood they weren't just filming a segment anymore. They were witnessing something that didn't fit neatly between commercial breaks. On the couch, the co-hosts scrambled. One tried to laugh it off. Well, that's certainly some powerful history. But the words landed with a hollow thud. Another leaned toward Madison, whispering something that didn't carry to the audience but made her flinch visibly. Madison, for her part, looked rattled. Really rattled. The kind of rattled you can't smooth over with a PR statement or a teary Instagram post. Her smile was gone now, replaced with a tight, thin line across her face. Her hands fidgeted with the stack of cue cards she wasn't reading anymore. The carefully crafted image, the one she spent years curating, the liberal ally, the voice for progress, was slipping, frame by frame, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She opened her mouth once, then shut it again, a faint pink creeping up her neck. The moderator's voice cut in, trying to steer the wreckage. "Well, thank you, Congresswoman Crockett, for that important perspective. Moving on." But even his voice cracked under the weight of what had just unfolded. There was no moving on. Not really, not for Madison, not for the studio, and not for the millions of people who, by the end of the day, would see this moment replayed over and over again, frame by frame, second by second. The cameras stayed rolling, because the truth had already been spoken. And the truth wasn't going back. The network thought they could control it, thought they could tighten the edits, soften the edges, sweep the worst of it under the glossy carpet before America had a chance to really see. They thought wrong. The raw footage leaked before the noon meeting even finished. No flashy graphics, no polished transitions, just a grainy clip, posted by a junior staffer who knew the world needed to see the whole thing, not the sanitized version. Within minutes, Twitter lit up like a struck match. First came the disbelief. People replaying Madison's words, hearing the sharpness of them in all their unedited cruelty. Then came the awe. Jasmine's response, steady, surgical, unshakable, spreading faster than even the insult itself. Screenshots flooded timelines. Quotes carved into memes. Snippets stitched into TikTok reaction videos with titles like, "How to Dismantle Racism Without Raising Your Voice." Hashtags climbed with a velocity even veteran reporters hadn't seen in years. Respect Jasmine. Go back where? This is America. Comment sections swelled under news site articles. Cable pundits scrambled to pivot segments, desperate to stay ahead of a story they didn't even understand yet. It wasn't just political junkies or activists watching. It was teachers, students, nurses on their lunch breaks. It was corporate employees sneaking glances between meetings. It was teenagers who couldn't even vote yet, posting Jasmine's words over backgrounds of sunsets and city skylines, adding captions like, "This is what leadership looks like." Even people who had never heard Jasmine Crockett's name before that morning now spoke it with something between admiration and pride. It wasn't a moment anymore. It was a reckoning. And at the center of it, steady, composed, was Jasmine. Not shouting, not demanding, just standing in the ruins of someone else's mask, untouched. By evening, the pressure was too loud for Madison Reed to ignore. The network issued a statement first, a bland paragraph about unfortunate misunderstandings and ongoing commitments to diverse conversations. The kind of corporate spin that says everything and nothing at once. Then came Madison's on-air apology. It was rushed, mechanical, wrapped in the usual cushions of plausible deniability. "If anyone was offended by my remarks this morning," she said, eyes darting just off camera, "that was never my intention. I deeply respect Congresswoman Crockett's service and perspective." The word "if" clanged against every wall it touched. If. As if offense was a mistake in interpretation, not an insult from the start. The public wasn't having it. Clips of the apology were sliced apart within minutes, slowed down, captioned, dragged across every platform like evidence at a trial. "She's sorry she got caught, not sorry she said it," one Twitter user wrote, racking up 200,000 likes before midnight. Meanwhile, the real voices weighed in. Ava DuVernay reposted Jasmine's speech with the words, "This is what grace under fire looks like." Cory Booker tweeted simply, "Respect is not negotiable." Even Beyoncé's publicist, a figure who rarely commented on political matters, liked 3 separate posts under the hashtag #RespectJasmine, and the Bayhive noticed. News outlets ran late-night segments dissecting the moment. Was this a slip of the tongue or a symptom of something deeper? Was allyship real if it fractured the second it got uncomfortable? By midnight, it didn't matter how many apologies Madison issued. The apology wasn't the headline anymore. Jasmine Crockett's poise was. Her calm wasn't just a momentary clapback. It was a masterclass in what real strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout to shake a room, actually looks like. And America, whether it was ready or not, had been forced to sit still and watch. She could have gone on a media tour. She could have booked every primetime slot, every podcast mic, every viral panel that wanted to ride the wave. But Jasmine Crockett didn't do that. Instead, 2 days after the footage exploded across the country, she released a video, just 3 minutes long. No production team, no flashy backdrops, no dramatic music swelling under her words. Just Jasmine, sitting in her home office, a simple navy blouse, no makeup team fussing around her, a quiet resolve radiating through the screen. She leaned forward slightly as the camera rolled, her voice measured, steady. "I'm not here to relive a bad moment," she began. "I'm here to talk about why moments like that keep happening." She didn't name Madison. She didn't need to. "Bias doesn't always come wearing a red hat and shouting slurs," Jasmine said. "Sometimes it comes dressed in liberal slogans and well-meaning smiles. Sometimes it hides behind jokes. Sometimes it's tucked inside compliments about how articulate or passionate we are." She paused, just long enough for the weight of her words to settle. If we're serious about change, it's not enough to call out the obvious hate. We have to challenge the comfortable, casual bias too, even when it comes from the people who say they're on our side. No anger, no theatrical outrage, just truth, laid bare without apology. Real progress doesn't come from being polite enough to ignore disrespect. It comes from being honest enough to name it when we see it, and being strong enough to stay in the room when the conversation gets uncomfortable. She smiled then, soft but unbreakable. This isn't about canceling anyone. It's about accountability, because the future we're fighting for isn't just built by the loudest voices. It's built by the clearest ones. The video ended without a call for donations, without a single ask. It was just a message, a mirror. And once again, America couldn't look away. The backlash against Madison Reed didn't end with ratings drops or half-hearted apologies. It started something deeper. In classrooms, on talk shows, across dinner tables and office Slack channels, a new conversation bloomed. Not just about overt racism, but about the kind that wears a friendly face. The kind that tells you it's on your side while still asking you to shrink a little to fit its comfort zone. College campuses organized teach-ins on hidden bias in progressive spaces. Churches that once prided themselves on diversity Sundays found themselves grappling with the difference between inclusion and true equity. Even major newsrooms held emergency roundtables on how subtle prejudice survives inside institutions that think they've moved past it. Jasmine Crockett's name became shorthand for something bigger than politics. It became about how strength isn't always loud. It's sometimes a quiet refusal to be small. Jasmine's platform didn't grow because she shouted louder than her critics. It grew because she didn't bend, because she told the truth, even when the room wanted to pretend they hadn't heard it. More speaking invitations flooded her office, but not for sound bites, for real conversations. Youth groups, civil rights organizations, even private corporations. Not asking her to endorse them, but to challenge them. Because now they knew allyship isn't a brand, it's a practice. And it starts when someone like Jasmine walks into the room and makes you rethink what you thought you already knew. Months later, during a quiet interview on a community podcast, Jasmine was asked what she thought about the incident now. She smiled that same patient smile and said, "Sometimes change doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing tall when others try to make you small. And sometimes, standing tall is all the noise you need." The host sat silent, letting the words breathe. Outside, the world kept turning. Messily, imperfectly, stubbornly. But in living rooms and lecture halls and hearts all across the country, something had shifted. And it wasn't going back. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.